people find those passages a little tough. The psalmist is used sometimes by the Right to Life movement to politicize that debate. And so when I hear it, I can't help but think of the pain of that topic. And the Genesis passage, over thousands of years, has been used to suppress women and to perpetuate patriarchism. So when we're presented with these things as ministers, we have to decide if we're going to go with the lectionary suggestions or if we're going to set them aside. Because our text is full of texts that create trouble, that if we look at them literally, sometimes it can get us in a lot of trouble. Especially with books like Genesis. When I was at AST, Biblical Foundations 1000, she showed us, Susan Slater showed us this cartoon. It's God there, and he's with Play-Doh, and he's with clay. And he says, he's making snakes. He says, boy, it's hard to finish. The easiest ones to make. And she said, she used this as an example that sometimes there's more to just creation and the story of creation than we might think. But sometimes we have to bring it down to some simple messages and some simple themes. Maybe, she said, even reclaim them within the context of the great ancient myth, or what we sometimes call the grand narrative. Our creation myth happened, this Genesis story was told by tribes around campfires 10,000 or approximately 1,000, 10th century BC. Okay, you know I have problems with numbers. So I always have to write it down. That's why I had to look. 10th century BC, tribal story, simple narrative, over campfires. Yes, it was told first in Hebrew, then it was written into our Septuagint, written down in Hebrew, translated to Greek, then into Latin, and over thousands of years mixed and played with by the priestly classes. The larger theme in this book is about spoiled relationships. The spoiled relationship specifically they talk about is between humankind and the land. It speaks about the struggle for survival and reaches out to express the pain of humanity. But our scripture says, despite that, nowhere can we hide from God. Can you imagine what it must have been like for Adam and Eve to actually be walking around conversationally talking to God? Like God was with them? Hey, God, how about this apple? No, I don't think you should eat that. Oh, why not? Can you imagine being that close to God that you could have those conversations? The story talks about in our humanness, that relationship changed when we started changing the way we dealt with the land. God is present in all creation, even us. That inescapable God is even found in the darkest places of our world. We are linked. God is noted as being the ground of our being. How many people have prayed and placed their feet on the ground in order to connect to God in prayer by thinking of your feet? It definitely helps me when I preach to to be closer and more linked to that which created me. God being our refuge and a safety net for us. If we look at Genesis teaching, it teaches that human actions outside of God lead to the stressing and the breakdown of human relationships and separation from the earth's elements. Okay, David, next one. Guess what I have been reading all summer long? Who has read this series? Anybody? Okay, it was written in the 1980s by Gina M. Ahl, I think is how you say her name. And they're really thick books. And I needed something to kind of get myself into summer vacation mode reading. I'm now on the 5th thick book, and it's one of the audiobooks I'm listening to coming back and forth. The scene, or the setting of these books is set in primeval time. And there's a woman, Ayla, who is a medicine woman. And she grows up with what they call the Flatheads, or the clan, or the people who came before the Homo sapiens with the head, the solid brow. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but and I'm sort of sketchy about whether or not some of this stuff in her books are true, but she uses research to try to build her story. She was brought up by this clan, even though she was one of the others, learned their ways, and worshipped the great Earth Mother. And the people of that time worshipped not God our Father, but the Great Mother. People have been around on this earth for millions of years. Millions of years. Judaism, like I said, with the tribal campfire stories, 10th century BC, started their own story that we pick up through Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago. And in interpretation of those stories, people like Augustine, who had love, but I'm also disappointed he brought this original sin idea into play. That was only a few thousand years ago. So sometimes we have to just take a look at the context of creation stories and know that ours is not the only one. Around the world, there are thousands of creation stories. Gilgamesh is a great example of creation stories that came way before ours. But ours speaks to us. We know it deeply. It's dear to us. But it also, through Jesus, we believe as Christians that God had an inbreaking into the world at that time, where we have the opportunity, where Jesus teaches us how to restore our relationship with God, the cosmic story, the cosmic Christ. Similar to Adam, as he walked along, talking to God, being that in tune with the elements of the earth and the elements of God, to understand well beyond what we could. So Jesus, for us, is like an Adam, being able to speak and be, or if you believe, be God in casual conversation. But today we have Land Sunday. Land is a very large aspect of shaping people, culture, identity, and perspectives. It gives us a sense of belonging to a particular place. Multiple times a day, I get in this role, "Where are you from?" Sometimes I wonder what people's reactions would be if I said, rather than, I hail from Kentville, if I said, I come from God. I do have my BSc, but I failed chemistry. The only class I ever failed 18% carbon, 10% hydrogen, 3% nitrogen, and others. That's what the earth is made up of. We are elements of the earth, mixed together a little differently. But we are of the earth. I read that it is often poorly appreciated that the human body is made up of the same stuff, elements and their compounds, of the rest of the physical and biological world. We don't appreciate that the human body is made up of those elements, and we see ourselves as being made up of different materials from anything else in the world. But the earth is our primary life support system. Our health relies on it for our basic need of minerals, water, and air. The connection between geology and health, the physical and the spiritual, can't be understated. I read about a research that the researcher asked this question of the research group. What chemicals do you associate with osteoporosis, anemia, dizziness, and heart and heat stress? And he found the answer very interesting. They related it to a deficiency in these corresponding elements. So calcium, iron, sodium, and water. But what surprised the researcher was that when asked where these chemicals come from, most people said, well, our body makes them. Incredulous, eh? But think about the next question. They asked, when cell division takes place, where do the elements come from to make new cells? Again, the people responded, our body makes these chemicals. Our bodies don't make the chemicals. The chemicals come from the earth, the air we breathe, the water we drink. We've become incredibly egocentric in our desire to be unique in all the world. And I think that speaks to what the Genesis passage tells us about spoiled relationships, about forgetting that we are so connected to the place and the land in which we and our generations before had lived. I'm going to bring this out, Margie. This was given to me when I left here after internship, and it was made by Marty Hennon. And it is, she makes dolls and paper dolls, and I went to visit her one day, and she showed me her art workshop, and she showed me all the wonderful things she makes. And she makes books and covers, and she pulled this one out. And it's a paper doll of a goddess. And I thought, oh, isn't that great? That's so cool. And you can dress her in all sorts of different outfits. And it gives, what I love about it is it gives us the ability to play with the idea that God is something different, great, miraculous, some part of element. She's made of clay. And we dress her or him up in outfits at our leisure and at our pleasure. And it's interesting how God has been defined over the years, and how the goddess mother of the millions of years ago has changed. So, one last point with regards to land. It's important when we talk about land to talk about refugee and displaced peoples. This shocked me. The global refugee figure passes 50 million for the first time since the Second World War this year. So there are so many people, and this is a staggering statistic. 51.2 million people, half of which are children, are now considered refugees, asylum seekers, or internally displaced peoples. From the point of view of our Indigenous peoples, being without a land is incredibly painful. Jesus calls us to compassion, which requires us to look through the eyes of people in the margins. It requires us to step away from our European colonization roots that describe the lands we settle as terra nullis, or land belonging to no one. We have to, whenever we talk about the land, it's important for us to talk about those in the margins and those who need our care as Christians. So in worship today, I've asked you to reflect on the presence of God in our land, in our time, in our place, and in relationship with us. And I'd like you, if you could, take away from the sermon today to contemplate this week on how we understand our personal and communal relationship to the land. Do we see it, and is it portrayed as a resource for exploitation and profit, an opportunity for food security, a place to live and work and play, or what I'd like you to think about it as this week is as a part of us, elements, as we are all a part of the ongoing creation story.